The military history of Mexico consists of several millennia of armed conflicts within what is now that nation's territory and includes activities of the Mexican military in peacekeeping and combat-related affairs worldwide. Wars between pre-Hispanic peoples marked the beginning of Mexico's military history. The most notable of these fought in the form of a Flower War. After the Spanish conquest of Mexico in the 16th century, indigenous tribes were defeated by Spain, thus beginning a three-century era of Spanish dominance. Mexico's struggle for independence began primarily in the 19th century, and was marked by internal conflict of early rulers after defeating the Spanish in 1821. The Mexican-American War in the mid-19th century ended in the defeat of Mexican forces, and the loss of 2/5 of the national territory. In the remainder of the 19th century, a series of conflicts began in Mexico, as the War of the Reform and the defeat of the French during their intervention in Mexico marked events in that era. Key military campaigns in the early 20th century include the Mexican Revolution and the Cristera War. These two conflicts, respectively, overthrew the dictatorship of Porfirio Diaz and challenged the largely anti-clerical nature of the post-revolutionary governments. Mexico stood among the allies of World War II and was one of two Latin American nations to send combat troops to serve in the Second World War. Recent developments in the Mexican military include deployment of troops to the United Nations, a cooperation with the United States in terms of patrolling borders, and relief sent during Hurricane Katrina. Pre-colonial era. During the age before Spanish conquest of Mexico, several wars ensued between the Aztecs and several other native tribes. Alliances between the Aztec state and Texcoco had become central to these pre-colonial wars. Several of these conflicts were evolved to an organized warfare, known as the Flower Wars. In the Flower Wars, the primary objective was to injure or capture the enemy, rather than killing as in Western warfare. Prisoners of war were ritually sacrificed to Aztec gods. Cannibalism was also a center feature to this type of warfare. Historical accounts such as that of Juan Bautista de Pomar state that small pieces of meat were offered as gifts to important people in exchange for presents and slaves. But it was rarely eaten, since they considered it had no value. Instead it was replaced by turkey, or just thrown away. Perhaps the most famous of the native Mexican states is the Aztec Empire. In the 13th and 14th centuries, around Lake Texcoco in the Anahuac Valley, the most powerful of these city-states were Culhuacan to the south, and Azcapotzalco to the west. Between them, they controlled the whole Lake Texcoco area. The Aztecs hired themselves out as mercenaries in wars between the Nahuas, breaking the balance of power between city-states. Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan formed a triple alliance that came to dominate the Valley of Mexico, and then extended its power beyond. Tenochtitlan, the traditional capital of the Aztec Empire, gradually became the dominant power in the alliance. It should be noted that the Chichimca, a wide range of nomadic groups that inhabited the north of modern-day Mexico, were never conquered by the Aztecs. Spanish conquest. In 1519, the native civilizations of Mexico were invaded by Spain, and 2 years later in 1521, the Aztec capital Tenochtitlan was conquered. Francisco Hernández de Córdoba explored the shores of southeast Mexico in 1517, followed by Juan de Grijalva in 1518. The most important of the early conquistadors was Hernán Cortés, who entered the country in 1519 from a native coastal town which he renamed Puerto de la Villa Rica de la Vera Cruz. In a series of wars and counter-rebellions over the next 2 centuries, Spain would expand and consolidate its Mexican territories. The Aztecs, the dominant empire in Mexico, believed that Calcotl would return on in Cacatl, or 1 reed year. The pre-Columbian calendar was divided into 52-year periods or cycles. Every 52nd year was a CEACATL. The year 1467 was such a year. On their arrival in the New World, the Aztecs thought the Spanish conquerors had been sent by the gods, so they initially offered little resistance to the advances of the conquerors. After a major battle in 1519, during which the Spanish forces were defeated and sent into retreat, the Spaniards regrouped outside the Valley of Mexico. After 8 months they were back, this time with an even larger contingent of native allies. By then, Spanish smallpox had ravaged the Aztec population, drastically reducing the Aztec fighting forces. The Spaniards surrounded and laid siege to the inhabitants of Tenochtitlan, bringing about the Aztecs' total defeat in 1521. It was one of the longest continuous sieges in world history. 3 major factors contributed to Spanish victory. First, the Spanish had superior military technology, including firearms, the bow and arrows, the crossbow, iron and steel weapons, the dog and the horse. The Spanish were further aided in the conquest by the Old World diseases they brought with them, to which the natives had no immunity, and which became pandemic, killing large portions of the native population. Finally, the Spanish enlisted the help of various subject peoples in the Aztec Empire who saw the Spanish as a means to free themselves from Aztec rule, mainly the Tlaxcalans.